She had 3 weeks left to live, and she did not know it. The young woman walked into our sitting room at 7:15 that morning. Her hair was streaked with grey, though she was barely 30 years of age. Her hands trembled, and in her eyes was a fear I had never seen in any patient of mine. She had come to us with a story of midnight whistles in the walls, of a sister who had died screaming in a locked room, and of 3 words, 3 strange words that her dying sister had gasped before the life left her body. The Speckled Band. What those words meant, not even Sherlock Holmes yet knew. Welcome to Foggy London Nights. I am your companion through the dark and quiet hours. Tonight, one of Sherlock Holmes's most extraordinary cases lies before us, the adventure of the Speckled Band. Close your eyes, slow your breathing. There is nothing more for you to do tonight, but listen. The fire is warm, the fog is thick, and the case begins now. The Adventure of the Speckled Band. It is the dead of night, in a great grey house upon a lonely English moor. The wind moves slow against the ivy on the walls. Stoke Moran, the house is called. 2 centuries old, half of it in ruin, the other half still lived in. In one of its bedrooms, a young woman lies awake. She does not know why she cannot sleep, only that the air in her room feels wrong, heavier than it should be, and there is a faint smell she cannot place, like oil, like something burned long ago. She turns her head upon the pillow. The clock in the hall strikes 3, and then she hears it, a low, clear whistle, sharp and brief, coming from somewhere within the walls themselves. She sits up. Her heart is pounding. She holds her breath, listens. There is only silence and the slow whisper of the wind beyond the shutters. And then, again, the whistle, closer this time. She does not know it yet, but she has only a few hours left to live. Her name was Julia Stoner, and before the dawn broke over that ancient house, she would be dead. But that is the end of the tale. Let us go back. Let us begin where I, John Watson, began it. It was a fine April morning in the year of our Lord 1883. I was, in those days, sharing rooms with my friend Sherlock Holmes at 221B Baker Street, and I was, I confess, fast asleep when the hand fell upon my shoulder. I opened my eyes. Holmes stood beside my bed, fully dressed. "Watson," he said softly, "I am very sorry to wake you, but the game is afoot." I rubbed the sleep from my eyes. "Holmes, what hour is it?" "It wants but 7:15. A young lady has called upon us in a state of considerable excitement. She is sitting at this moment in our sitting room. She has clearly travelled some distance to reach us before breakfast, and she is, by her appearance, in great fear of something, or someone." He paused. His grey eyes were keen and bright with that quiet anticipation I knew so well. "Come, my dear fellow, dress quickly. I should like to have you present." I needed no further encouragement. There was no greater pleasure in life than to be at Sherlock Holmes's side when the chase had begun. A few minutes later, washed and dressed, I followed Holmes down the stairs into our sitting room. The morning fire was already burning. Pale spring sunlight crept in through the lace curtains, and there, in the chair opposite the fire, sat the lady. She was, I should say, no more than 30 years of age. yet her hair was already streaked with grey, as though some prolonged sorrow had begun to mark her before her time. Her face was very pale, her eyes were restless, and her hands, folded in her lap, trembled in a manner that no effort of will could conceal. She wore a heavy black travelling cloak, a thick veil pushed back from her brow. Beside her chair lay a small handbag, clutched even now, as though she feared to set it down. She was, in every aspect, a hunted creature. Holmes greeted her warmly. He drew a chair beside her, opposite the fire. He laid a long, thin hand upon hers, and I saw in that moment the gentleness of which he was capable, and which the world so seldom saw. "You must not fear," he said quietly. "We shall soon set matters right, you and I. You have come by train this morning, I see." She started. She stared at him. "You know me, sir?" "No, madam, but I observe the second half of a return ticket in the palm of your left glove. You must have started early, and yet you had a long drive in a dog-cart along heavy roads before you reached the station." Her eyes widened. She looked down at her boots, and then at the spatters of mud upon her left sleeve, and back up at him in something close to wonder. "There is no mystery in it, my dear madam," said Holmes with a faint smile. "The left arm of your jacket is spattered with mud in no less than 7 places. The marks are perfectly fresh. There is no vehicle, save a dog-cart, which throws up mud in that way, and then only when you sit upon the left-hand side of the driver." She smiled then, for the first time since she had entered the room. It was a small, tired smile, and it vanished quickly, but it was the smile of one who has come at last into the company of a mind that might understand her. "Whatever your reasons may be, sir," she said, "you are perfectly correct. I started from home before 6. I reached Leatherhead by the first train. I came into Waterloo, and, sir, I can stand this strain no longer. I shall go mad if it continues." Her voice broke. She looked into the fire. "I have no one to turn to, none, save one who cares for me, and he, poor fellow, can be of little aid. I have heard of you, Mr. Holmes. Oh, sir, do you not think that you could help me too?" Holmes leaned slightly forward. His grey eyes were calm and steady and very kind. "I shall be happy to devote my full attention to your case, madam. As to reward, my profession is its own reward. And now I beg that you will lay before us everything that may help us in forming an opinion upon the matter." The lady drew a long breath. She gathered her cloak about her, and in a low, trembling voice she began her tale. "My name," she said, "is Helen Stoner, and I live with my stepfather, who is the last survivor of one of the oldest Saxon families in England, the Roylotts of Stoke Moran, on the western border of Surrey." Holmes nodded slowly. "The name is familiar to me. The family was once among the richest in England, but the estates were squandered, generation after generation, by dissolute and wasteful men. Nothing was left save the 200-year-old house, which is itself crushed under a heavy mortgage." She paused. Her hands tightened in her lap. "My stepfather, Dr. Grimsby Roylott, was the last of that ruined line. He took a medical degree. He went out to Calcutta in India, and there, by his skill, he built a large practice." Her voice fell lower. "It was there, sir, that the first of the troubles began." She did not look up. She spoke now as though to the fire alone. "He had always been a man of violent temper, a terrible temper. In India, this temper grew worse. One night, he came home to find his house had been burgled. His native butler, a young man, was suspected. My stepfather beat him to death with his own hands. I heard my breath catch in my throat. He narrowly escaped a capital sentence. He suffered a long term of imprisonment, and he returned to England afterwards, a morose and disappointed man." She lifted her eyes at last. They were dark with fear. "It was while he was in India that my mother, his wife, died. My twin sister Julia and I were but 2 years old at the time. My mother had a considerable sum of money, not less than £1,000 a year, and she bequeathed it all we resided with him, while that a certain annual sum should be allowed to each of us in the event of our marriage." Holmes's eyes sharpened. He saying nothing, but he leaned forward in his chair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. He had heard it too. In that one sentence lay the shape of something dark, something not yet named, something that had already begun to move within those ancient walls of Stoke Moran. A motive, a reason for a young woman to die. Helen Stoner drew a slow breath. She looked into the fire as though she could see within those flames the rooms of that old house she so feared. "When we returned to England with my stepfather," she said, "we went to live at Stoke Moran. The money my mother had left was ample for all our wants. There seemed to be no obstacle to our happiness." She paused. "But a terrible change came over my stepfather about this time. Instead of making friends with our neighbours, he shut himself up in his house. He seldom came out, save to indulge in ferocious quarrels with whoever might cross his path. Violence of temper, approaching to mania, has been hereditary in the men of his family, and in my stepfather, I believe, it had been intensified by his long residence in the tropics." Her voice fell. "There were many fights. He was twice taken before the police court. At last he became the terror of the village, and folk would fly at his approach, for he is a man of immense strength, and absolutely uncontrollable in his anger." I glanced at Holmes. His expression had not changed, but his eyes were very still, very fixed. He was listening. "He has no friends at all," Helen continued, "save the wandering gypsies. He gives these vagabonds leave to encamp upon the few acres of bramble-covered land which represents the family estate. He accepts in return the hospitality of their tents, wandering away with them sometimes for weeks on end." She hesitated. Then her voice grew quieter still. "He has a passion, also, for Indian animals. They are sent over to him by a correspondent, and he has, at this moment, a cheetah and a baboon which wander freely over his grounds, and which are feared by the villagers almost as much as their master." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Holmes drew thoughtfully upon his pipe. "You can imagine from what I say," Helen said, "that my poor sister Julia and I had no great pleasure in our lives. No servant would stay with us, and for a long time we did all the work of the house ourselves. She was but 30 at the time of her death, and yet her hair had already begun to whiten, even as mine has." "Your sister is dead, then?" "She died just 2 years ago, and it is of her death that I wish to speak to you." Holmes set down his pipe. "Pray be precise as to details," he said softly. Helen's hands twisted in her lap. "It is easy for me to be so, for every event of that dreadful time is seared into my memory." She gathered herself. "The manor house is, as I have said, very old, and only one wing is now inhabited. The bedrooms in this wing are on the ground floor, the sitting rooms being in the central block of the buildings. Of these bedrooms, the first is Dr. Roylott's, the second my sister's, and the third my own. There is no communication between them, but they all open out into the same corridor." Holmes nodded slowly. "2 years ago," Helen continued, "the life of my sister Julia did at last begin to brighten. She had become engaged to a half-pay major of Marines, a good and worthy man. My stepfather offered no objection to the match, and we were to be married in the spring." She paused, her breath caught. 2 weeks before the day fixed for the wedding, the terrible event occurred, which has deprived me of my only companion." The fire popped. A coal shifted. Helen did not seem to hear it. "It was a wild night," she whispered. "The wind was howling outside, and the rain was beating and splashing against the windows. We were sitting, Julia and I, in my room. We had been talking about her wedding, about the future, about the small happiness that was almost within her reach." She closed her eyes. "At 11 o'clock she rose to leave me, but she paused at the door and looked back. 'Tell me, Helen,' she said, 'have you ever heard anyone whistle in the dead of the night?' 'Never,' I said. 'I suppose that you could not possibly whistle yourself in your sleep?' 'Certainly not. But why?' 'Because during the last few nights I have always, about 3 in the morning, heard a low, clear whistle. I am a light sleeper, and it has awakened me. I cannot tell where it came from. Perhaps from the next room, perhaps from the lawn. I thought that I would just ask you whether you had heard it.'
'No, I have not. It must be those wretched gypsies in the plantation.' 'Very likely. And yet, if it were on the lawn, I wonder that you did not hear it also.' 'Ah, but I sleep more heavily than you. Well, it is of no great consequence at any rate.' Helen opened her eyes. They were shining now, with tears she would not let fall. "She smiled back at me," Helen said softly. "She closed my door, and a few moments later I heard her key turn in the lock of her own room." Holmes leaned forward. "Indeed," he said. "Was it your custom always to lock yourselves in at night?" "Always." "And why?" Helen's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I think I mentioned to you that the doctor kept a cheetah and a baboon. We had no feeling of security unless our doors were locked." "Quite so. Pray proceed with your statement." Helen Stoner took another breath. The fire had burned low. She did not seem to feel the chill that crept into the room. "I could not sleep that night," she said. "A vague feeling of impending misfortune impressed me. My sister and I, you will recollect, were twins, and you know how subtle are the links which bind two souls so closely allied." She looked at Holmes. Her eyes were very wide. "It was a wild night. The wind was howling outside. The rain was beating and splashing against the windows. Suddenly, amid all the hubbub of the gale, there burst forth, 'Ah!' the wild scream of a terrified woman. Her hands clenched. I knew that it was my sister's voice. I sprang from my bed. I wrapped a shawl about me. I rushed into the corridor. The room was very still now, only the soft tick of the clock upon the mantel.
As I opened my door, I seemed to hear a low whistle such as my sister had described, and a few moments later a clanging sound as if a mass of metal had fallen. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "A clanging sound," he repeated softly. "Yes. As I ran down the passage, my sister's door was unlocked, and it slowly swung open upon its hinges. I stared at it, horrified, not knowing what was about to issue from it." She paused. Her voice trembled. By the light of the corridor lamp, I saw my sister appear at the opening. Her face blanched with terror, her hands groping for help, her whole figure swaying to and fro like that of a drunkard. I felt my own breath catch. I ran to her. I threw my arms around her, but at that moment her knees seemed to give way, and she fell to the ground. She writhed as one who is in terrible pain, and her limbs were dreadfully convulsed. Helen's voice broke. She forced herself on. At first I thought that she had not recognized me, but as I bent over her, she suddenly shrieked out in a voice which I shall never forget. She closed her eyes. "Oh my God, Helen! It was the band! The Speckled band!" The words hung in the room like smoke. There was something else which she would fain have said, and she stabbed with her finger into the air in the direction of the doctor's room. But a fresh convulsion seized her, and the words were choked in her throat. A single tear slipped down Helen Stoner's cheek. She did not wipe it away. I rushed out, calling loudly for my stepfather. I met him hastening from his room in his dressing gown. When he reached my sister's side, she was unconscious, and though he poured brandy down her throat and sent for medical aid from the village, all efforts were in vain, for she slowly sank and died without having recovered her consciousness. The fire gave a small crack. Holmes did not move. Such was the dreadful end of my beloved sister. Holmes was silent for a long moment. "You are certain about this whistle and metallic sound?" he asked at last. "Could you swear to it?" "That was what the county coroner asked me at the inquiry. It is my strong impression that I heard it, and yet, among the crash of the gale and the creaking of an old house, I may possibly have been deceived." "Was your sister dressed?" "No, she was in her nightdress. In her right hand was found the charred stump of a match, and in her left a matchbox, showing that she had struck a light and looked about her when the alarm took place. That is important." Holmes rose. He paced once slowly before the fire. Then he turned back. "And what conclusions did the coroner come to?" "He investigated the case with great care, for Dr. Roylott's conduct had long been notorious in the county, but he was unable to find any satisfactory cause of death. My evidence showed that the door had been fastened upon the inner side. The windows were blocked by old-fashioned shutters with broad iron bars, which were secured every night. The walls were carefully sounded and were shown to be quite solid all round. The flooring was also thoroughly examined with the same result. The chimney is wide, but it is barred up by 4 large staples." She lifted her eyes. "It is certain, therefore, that my sister was quite alone when she met her end. Besides, there were no marks of any violence upon her." "How about poison?" "The doctors examined her for it, but without success." "What do you think that this unfortunate lady died of, then?" "It is my belief," said Helen quietly, "that she died of pure fear and nervous shock. Though what it was that frightened her, I cannot imagine." Holmes nodded slowly. He stared into the fire. "Were there gypsies in the plantation at the time?" "Yes, there are nearly always some there." "Ah, and what did you gather from this allusion to a band, a speckled band?" "Sometimes I have thought that it was merely the wild talk of delirium. Sometimes that it may have referred to some band of people, perhaps to these very gypsies in the plantation. I do not know whether the spotted handkerchiefs, which so many of them wear over their heads, might have suggested the strange adjective which she used. Holmes shook his head slowly. He was not satisfied. "These are very deep waters," he murmured. "Pray go on with your narrative." Helen Stoner gathered herself once more. She had told the worst of it, but not all of it. "2 years have passed since then," she said, "and my life has been, until lately, lonelier than ever. A month ago, however, a dear friend whom I have known for many years has done me the honour to ask my hand in marriage. His name is Armitage, Percy Armitage, the second son of Mr. Armitage of Cranewater, near Reading." Her voice, for the first time, held something softer than fear. "My stepfather has offered no opposition to the match, and we are to be married in the course of the spring." She paused. 2 days ago, some repairs were started in the west wing of the building, and my bedroom wall has been pierced so that I have had to move into the chamber in which my sister died, and to sleep in the very bed in which she slept. The room seemed colder. Imagine, then, my thrill of terror when last night, as I lay awake, thinking over her terrible fate, I suddenly heard, in the silence of the night, the low whistle which had been the herald of her own death. Holmes's eyes lifted sharply. I sprang up. I lit the lamp, but nothing was to be seen in the room. I was too shaken to go to bed again, however, so I dressed, and as soon as it was daylight, I slipped down, got a dog-cart at the Crown Inn, which is opposite, and drove to Leatherhead, from whence I have come on this morning, with the one object of seeing you and asking your advice." Holmes was very still. "You have done wisely," he said quietly. "But have you told me all?" "Yes, all." "Miss Roylott, you have not. You are screening your stepfather." "Why? What do you mean?" For answer, Holmes pushed back the frill of black lace which fringed the hand that lay upon Helen's knee. 5 small, livid spots, the marks of 4 fingers and a thumb, were printed upon the white wrist. "You have been cruelly used," he said. The lady coloured deeply. She covered her injured wrist. "He is a hard man," she whispered, "and perhaps he hardly knows his own strength." There was a long silence. The fire had grown low. Outside, somewhere far off, a hansom rattled by upon the cobblestones. Holmes leaned back in his chair. He pressed the tips of his long fingers together. He stared into the dying flames, and was silent for a very long time. "This is a very deep business," he said at last. "There are 1,000 details which I should desire to know before I decide upon our course of action. Yet we have not a moment to lose. If we were to come to Stoke Moran today, would it be possible for us to see over these rooms without the knowledge of your stepfather?" As it happens, he spoke of coming into town today upon some most important business. It is probable that he will be away all day, and that there would be nothing to disturb you. We have a housekeeper now, but she is old and foolish, and I could easily get her out of the way." "Excellent. You are not averse to this trip, Watson?" "By no means." "Then we shall both come." He turned again to Helen. "What are you yourself going to do?" "I have 1 or 2 things which I would wish to do, now that I am in town, but I shall return by the 12 o'clock train, so as to be there in time for your coming." "And you may expect us early in the afternoon. I have myself some small business matters to attend to. Will you not wait and breakfast?" "No, I must go. My heart is lightened already, since I have confided my trouble to you. I shall look forward to seeing you again this afternoon." She dropped her thick black veil over her face, and she glided from the room. Holmes stood at the window. He watched her down the street until she was lost in the fog. Then he turned to me. "What do you think of it all, Watson?" "It seems to me," I said, "to be a most dark and sinister business." "Dark enough and sinister enough. Yet, if the lady is correct in saying that the floor and walls are sound, and that the door, window, and chimney are impassable, then her sister must have been undoubtedly alone when she met her mysterious end. What becomes, then, of these nocturnal whistles? And what of the very peculiar words of the dying woman? I cannot imagine. When you combine the idea of whistles at night, the presence of a band of gypsies who are on intimate terms with this old doctor, the fact that we have every reason to believe that the doctor has an interest in preventing his stepdaughter's marriage, the dying allusion to a band, and finally, the fact that Miss Helen Stoner heard a metallic clang, which might have been caused by one of those metal bars that secured the shutters falling back into its place, I think that there is good ground to think that the mystery may be cleared along those lines. I shook my head slowly. But what, then, did the gypsies do? I cannot imagine. I see many objections to any such theory. And so do I, said Holmes. It is for that very reason that we are going to Stoke Moran this day. I want to see whether the objections are fatal, or if they may be explained away. He paused. But what in the name of the devil? The exclamation had been drawn from my companion by the fact that the door had suddenly been dashed open, and that a huge man had framed himself in the aperture. He was a huge man, so tall that his hat actually brushed the crossbar of the doorway, and so broad that he seemed to span it from side to side. A large face, seared with 1,000 wrinkles, burned yellow with the sun, and marked with every evil passion, was turned from one of us to the other, while his deep-set, bile-shot eyes and his high, thin, fleshless nose gave him somewhat the resemblance to a fierce old bird of prey. "Which of you is Holmes?" asked this apparition. "My name, sir, but you have the advantage of me," said my companion quietly. "I am Dr. Grimesby Roylott of Stoke Moran." "Indeed, doctor," said Holmes blandly. "Pray take a seat." "I will do nothing of the kind. My stepdaughter has been here. I have traced her. What has she been saying to you?" "It is a little cold for the time of the year," said Holmes. "What has she been saying to you?" screamed the old man furiously. "But I have heard that the crocuses promise well," continued my companion imperturbably. "Ha! You put me off, do you?" said our new visitor, taking a step forward and shaking his hunting crop. "I know you, you scoundrel. I have heard of you before. You are Holmes, the meddler." My friend smiled. Holmes's smile grew broader. "Holmes, the busybody!" His smile grew broader still. "Holmes, the Scotland Yard Jack-in-Office!" Holmes chuckled heartily. "Your conversation is most entertaining," said he. "When you go out, close the door, for there is a decided draught. I will go when I have said my say. Don't you dare to meddle with my affairs. I know that Miss Stoner has been here. I traced her. I am a dangerous man to fall foul of." He stepped swiftly forward. He seized the poker, and he bent it into a curve with his huge brown hands. "See that you keep yourself out of my grip," he snarled, and hurling the twisted poker into the fireplace, he strode out of the room. "He seems a very amiable person," said Holmes, laughing. "I am not quite so bulky, but if he had remained, I might have shown him that my grip was not much more feeble than his own." As he spoke, he picked up the steel poker, and with a sudden effort he straightened it out again. Fancy his having the insolence to confound me with the official detective force. This incident gives zest to our investigation, however. I only trust that our little friend will not suffer from her imprudence in allowing this brute to trace her. And now, Watson, we shall order breakfast, and afterwards I shall walk down to Doctor's Commons, where I hope to get some data which may help us in this matter. It was nearly 1 o'clock when Sherlock Holmes returned from his excursion. He held in his hand a sheet of blue paper, scrawled over with notes and figures. "I have seen the will of the deceased wife," said he. "To determine its exact meaning, I have been obliged to work out the present prices of the investments with which it is concerned." He sat down by the fire. "The total income, which at the time of the wife's death was little short of £1,100, is now, through the fall in agricultural prices, not more than 750. Each daughter can claim an income of 250 in case of marriage." He looked up. His grey eyes were very steady. "It is evident, therefore, that if both girls had married, this beauty would have had a mere pittance, while even one of them would cripple him to a very serious extent. My morning's work has not been wasted, since it has proved that he has the very strongest motives for standing in the way of anything of the sort." He folded the paper. "And now, Watson, this is too serious for dawdling, especially as the old man is aware that we are interesting ourselves in his affairs. So, if you are ready, we shall call a cab and drive to Waterloo." He paused at the door. He turned back, and in his face was something I had rarely seen there, something cold, something resolved. "I should be very much obliged," he said quietly, "if you would slip your revolver into your pocket. An Ely's No. 2 is an excellent argument with gentlemen who can twist steel pokers into knots. That and a toothbrush are, I think, all that we need." At Waterloo we were fortunate in catching a train for Leatherhead, where we hired a trap at the station inn and drove for 4 or 5 miles through the lovely Surrey lanes. It was a perfect day, with a bright sun and a few fleecy clouds in the heavens. The trees and wayside hedges were just throwing out their first green shoots, and the air was full of the pleasant smell of the moist earth. To me, at least, there was a strange contrast between the sweet promise of the spring and this sinister quest upon which we were engaged. My companion sat in the front of the trap, his arms folded, his hat pulled down over his eyes, his chin sunk upon his breast, buried in the deepest thought. Suddenly, however, he started. He tapped me upon the shoulder, and he pointed over the meadows. "Look there," said he. A heavily timbered park stretched up in a gentle slope, thickening into a grove at the highest point. From amid the branches there jutted out the grey gables and high roof-tree of a very old mansion. "Stoke Moran," said he. "Yes, sir, that be the house of Dr. Grimesby Roylott," remarked the driver. "There is some building going on there," said Holmes. "That is where we are going." "There's the village," said the driver, pointing to a cluster of roofs some distance to the left. "But if you want to get to the house, you'll find it shorter to get over this stile, and so by the footpath over the fields." We paid our fare, we were turned out at the gate, and as the trap rattled back towards Leatherhead, we set off across the fields. A few minutes' walk brought us to the gate of the park. The path wound through it to the lawn in front of the house. The building was of grey, lichen-blotched stone, with a high central portion and 2 curving wings like the claws of a crab thrown out on each side. In one of these wings the windows were broken and blocked with wooden boards, while the roof was partly caved in. a picture of ruin. The central portion was in little better repair, but the right-hand block was comparatively modern, and the blinds in the windows, with the blue smoke curling up from the chimneys, showed that this was where the family resided. Some scaffolding had been erected against the end wall, and the stonework had been broken into, but there were no signs of any workmen at the moment of our visit. Holmes walked slowly up and down the ill-trimmed lawn. He examined with deep attention the outsides of the windows. "This, I take it, belongs to the room in which you used to sleep," he said. "The centre one to your sister's, and the one next to the main building to Dr. Roylott's chamber?" "Exactly so, but I am now sleeping in the middle one." "Pending the alterations, as I understand. By the way, there does not seem to be any very pressing need for repairs at that end wall." "There were none. I believe that it was an excuse to move me from my room." "Ah, that is suggestive." Holmes walked round the end of the wing. He turned over the fallen shutters with his stick, then on round the back to examine each of the windows in turn. Finally, he walked back to the ladies' room, where he proceeded to make a most careful examination. There were 2 small wickerwork chairs, a simple little white counterpaned bed, a dressing table, a chest of drawers, and a square of Wilton carpet in the centre. The boards round about and the panelling of the walls were of brown, worm-eaten oak, so old and discoloured that it may have dated from the original building of the house. Holmes drew one of the chairs into a corner and sat silent, while his eyes travelled round and up and down, taking in every detail of the apartment. "Where does that bell communicate with?" he asked at last, pointing to a thick bell rope which hung down beside the bed, the tassel actually lying upon the pillow. "It goes to the housekeeper's room." "It looks newer than the other things." "Yes, it was only put there a couple of years ago." "Your sister asked for it, I suppose?" "No, I never heard of her using it. We used always to get what we wanted for ourselves." "Indeed, it seemed unnecessary to put so nice a bell-pull there." He stooped. He examined the floor with his lens. "That is a very curious thing. The bell rope is fastened to a hook just above where the little opening of the ventilator is. It has no wire." "How very absurd! I never noticed that before." "Yes, the ventilator must lead into another room." "Some of them do, but to the open air." "No, it opens into Dr. Roylott's room."
"Ah, said Holmes. "This is very interesting." He drew himself up. He stood looking at the ventilator with the keenest interest. "There are 1 or 2 very singular points about this room. For example, what a fool a builder must be to open a ventilator into another room, when, with the same trouble, he might have communicated with the outside air." "That also is quite a modern alteration," said Helen. "Done about the same time as the bell rope?" remarked Holmes. "Yes, there were several little changes carried out about that time. They seem to have been of a most interesting character. Dummy bell ropes, and ventilators which do not ventilate." He moved slowly across the room. He examined the bed. "With your permission, Miss Stoner, we shall now carry our researches into the inner apartment." But before we left the room, his eyes fell upon the bed itself. "This is a very strange thing," he murmured. "The bed is clamped to the floor. It has been screwed down.
You could not move it. It is fixed. Yes, it has always been fixed like that. Your sister could not have moved her bed. No, she could not move it. It must always have been in the same relative position to the ventilator and to the rope, or cord, as we may call it, since it would appear that it was never meant for a bell pull. Holmes, I cried, I seem to see dimly what you are hinting at. We are only just in time to prevent some subtle and horrible crime. Subtle enough, and horrible enough. When a doctor does go wrong, he is the first of criminals. He has nerve, and he has knowledge. Holmes's voice was very low. Palmer and Pritchard were among the heads of their profession. This man strikes even deeper. But I think, Watson, that we shall be able to strike deeper still. Now, let us have a look at this other room. Doctor. Grimesby Roylott's chamber was larger than that of his stepdaughter, but was as plainly furnished. A camp bed, a small wooden shelf full of books, mostly of a technical character, an armchair beside the bed, a plain wooden chair against the wall, a round table, and a large iron safe were the principal things which met the eye. Holmes walked slowly round. He examined each of them with the keenest interest. "What's in here?" he asked, tapping the safe. "My stepfather's business papers." "Oh, you have seen inside, then?" "Only once, some years ago. I remember that it was full of papers." "There isn't a cat in it, for example?" "No. What a strange idea." "Well, look at this." He took up a small saucer of milk which stood on the top of it. "No, we don't keep a cat, but there is a cheetah and a baboon." "Ah, yes, of course. Well, a cheetah is just a big cat, and yet a saucer of milk does not go very far in satisfying its wants, I dare say. There is one point which I should wish to determine." He squatted down in front of the wooden chair. He examined the seat of it with the greatest attention. "Thank you, that is quite settled," said he, rising and putting his lens in his pocket. "Halloa, here is something interesting." The object which had caught his eye was a small dog lash hung on one corner of the bed. The lash, however, was curled upon itself and tied so as to make a loop of whipcord. "What do you make of that, Watson?" "It's a common enough lash, but I don't know why it should be tied." "That is not quite so common, is it? Ah me, it's a wicked world. And when a clever man turns his brains to crime, it is the worst of all." He paused. "I think that I have seen enough now, Miss Stoner, and with your permission we shall walk out upon the lawn." I had never seen my friend's face so grim, nor his brow so dark, as it was when we turned from the scene of this investigation. We had walked several times up and down the lawn, neither Helen Stoner nor I liking to break in upon his thoughts, before he roused himself from his reverie. "It is very essential, Miss Stoner," said he, "that you should absolutely follow my advice in every respect." "I shall most certainly do so. The matter is too serious for any hesitation. Your life may depend upon your compliance. I assure you that I am in your hands. In the first place, both my friend and I must spend the night in your room." Both Helen and I gazed at him in astonishment. "Yes, it must be so. Let me explain. I believe that that is the village inn over there." "Yes, that is the Crown." "Very good. Your windows would be visible from there." "Certainly."
You must confine yourself to your room on pretence of a headache when your stepfather comes back. Then, when you hear him retire for the night, you must open the shutters of your window, undo the hasp, put your lamp there as a signal to us, and then withdraw quietly, with everything which you are likely to want, into the room which you used to occupy." He paused. "I have no doubt that in spite of the repairs, you could manage there for one night." "Oh, yes, easily." "The rest you will leave in our hands." "But what will you do?" "We shall spend the night in your room, and we shall investigate the cause of this noise which has disturbed you." "I believe, Mr. Holmes, that you have already made up your mind," said Helen, laying her hand upon my companion's sleeve. "Perhaps I have." "Then for pity's sake, tell me what was the cause of my sister's death." "I should prefer to have clearer proofs before I speak." "You can at least tell me whether my own thought is correct, and if she died from some sudden fright." "No, I do not think so. I think that there was probably some more tangible cause. And now, Miss Stoner, we must leave you, for if Dr. Roylott returned and saw us, our journey would be in vain. Goodbye, and be brave, for if you will do what I have told you, you may rest assured that we shall soon drive away the dangers that threaten you." Sherlock Holmes and I had no difficulty in engaging a bedroom and sitting-room at the Crown Inn. They were on the upper floor, and from our window we could command a view of the avenue gate and of the inhabited wing of Stoke Moran Manor House. At dusk we saw Dr. Grimesby Roylott drive past, his huge form looming up beside the little figure of the lad who drove him. The boy had some slight difficulty in undoing the heavy iron gates, and we heard the hoarse roar of the doctor's voice and saw the fury with which he shook his clenched fists at him. The trap drove on, and a few minutes later we saw a sudden light spring up among the trees as the lamp was lit in one of the sitting-rooms. "Do you know, Watson," said Holmes as we sat together in the gathering darkness, "I have really some scruples as to taking you tonight. There is a distinct element of danger." "Can I be of assistance?" "Your presence might be invaluable." "Then I shall certainly come." "It is very kind of you. You probably do not know that there is a communication between that lady's room and ours." "Indeed." "I am sure that I saw a ventilator. It was a most unusual one to be made within these last few years, at the same time that the bell rope was moved to a position just above the bed." "My dear Holmes." "Did you observe anything very peculiar about that bed?" "No." "It was clamped to the floor. Did you ever see a bed fastened like that before?" "I cannot say that I have." "The lady could not move her bed. It must always be in the same relative position to the ventilator and to the rope, for so we may call it, since it was clearly never meant for a bell pull." "Holmes," I cried, "I seem to see dimly what you are hinting at." About 9 o'clock, the light among the trees was extinguished, and all was dark in the direction of the manor house. 2 hours passed slowly away, and then, suddenly, just at the stroke of 11, a single bright light shone out, right in front of us. "That is our signal," said Holmes, springing to his feet. "It comes from the middle window." There was no difficulty in entering the grounds, for unrepaired breaches gaped in the old park wall.
Making our way among the trees, we reached the lawn, crossed it, and were about to enter through the window, when out from a clump of laurel bushes there darted what seemed to be a hideous and distorted child, which threw itself upon the grass with writhing limbs, and then ran swiftly across the lawn into the darkness. "My God," I whispered, "did you see it?" Holmes was for the moment as startled as I. His hand closed like a vice upon my wrist in his agitation. Then he broke into a low laugh and put his lips to my ear. "It is a nice household," he murmured. "That is the baboon." I had forgotten the strange pets which the doctor affected. There was a cheetah, too. We might find it upon our shoulders at any moment. I confess that I felt easier in my mind when, after following Holmes's example and slipping off my shoes, I found myself inside the bedroom. My companion noiselessly closed the shutters, moved the lamp onto the table, and cast his eyes round the room. All was as we had seen it in the daytime. Then, creeping up to me, and making a trumpet of his hand, he whispered into my ear again, so gently that it was all that I could do to distinguish the words. "The least sound would be fatal to our plans." I nodded to show that I had heard. "We must sit without light. He would see it through the ventilator." I nodded again. "Do not go to sleep. Your very life may depend upon it. Have your pistol ready in case we should need it. I will sit on the side of the bed, and you in that chair." I took out my revolver and laid it on the corner of the table. Holmes had brought up a long, thin cane, and this he placed upon the bed beside him. By it he laid the box of matches and the stump of a candle. Then he turned down the lamp, and we were left in darkness. How shall I ever forget that dreadful vigil? I could not hear a sound, not even the drawing of a breath. And yet I knew that my companion sat open-eyed within a few feet of me, in the same state of nervous tension in which I was myself. The shutters cut off the least ray of light, and we waited in absolute darkness. From outside came the occasional cry of a night bird, and once, at our very window, a long-drawn, cat-like whine, which told us that the cheetah was indeed at liberty. Far away we could hear the deep tones of the parish clock, which boomed out every quarter of an hour. How long they seemed, those quarters! 12 struck, and 1, and 2, and 3, and still we sat, waiting silently for whatever might befall. Suddenly there was the momentary gleam of a light up in the direction of the ventilator, which vanished immediately, but was succeeded by a strong smell of burning oil and heated metal. Someone in the next room had lit a dark lantern. I heard a gentle sound of movement, and then all was silent once more, though the smell grew stronger. For half an hour I sat with straining ears. Then suddenly another sound became audible, a very gentle, soothing sound, like that of a small jet of steam escaping continually from a kettle. The instant that we heard it, Holmes sprang from the bed, struck a match, and lashed furiously with his cane at the bell pull. "You see it, Watson," he yelled. "You see it!" But I saw nothing. At the moment when Holmes struck the light, I heard a low, clear whistle, but the sudden glare flashing into my weary eyes made it impossible for me to tell what it was at which my friend lashed so savagely. I could, however, see that his face was deadly pale, and filled with horror and loathing. He had ceased to strike, and was gazing up at the ventilator, when suddenly There broke from the silence of the night the most horrible cry to which I have ever listened. It swelled up louder and louder, a hoarse yell of pain and fear and anger all mingled in the one dreadful shriek. They say that away down in the village, and even in the distant parsonage, that cry raised the sleepers from their beds. It struck cold to our hearts. I stood gazing at Holmes, and he at me, until the last echoes of it had died away into the silence from which it rose. "What can it mean?" I gasped. "It means that it is all over," Holmes answered. "And perhaps, after all, it is for the best. Take your pistol, and we will enter Dr. Roylott's room." With a grave face, he lit the lamp and led the way down the corridor. Twice he struck at the chamber door without any reply from within. Then he turned the handle and entered, I at his heels, with the cocked pistol in my hand. It was a singular sight which met our eyes. On the table stood a dark lantern with the shutter half open, throwing a brilliant beam of light upon the iron safe, the door of which was ajar. Beside the table, on the wooden chair, sat Dr. Grimesby Roylott, clad in a long grey dressing gown, his bare ankles protruding beneath, and his feet thrust into red, heelless Turkish slippers. Across his lap lay the short stock with the long lash which we had noticed during the day. His chin was cocked upward, and his eyes were fixed in a dreadful, rigid stare at the corner of the ceiling. Round his brow he had a peculiar yellow band with brownish speckles, which seemed to be bound tightly round his head. As we entered, he made neither sound nor motion. "The band, the speckled band," whispered Holmes. I took a step forward. In an instant his strange headgear began to move, and there reared itself from among his hair the squat, diamond-shaped head and puffed neck of a loathsome serpent. "It is a swamp adder," cried Holmes, "the deadliest snake in India. He has died within 10 seconds of being bitten. Violence does, in truth, recoil upon the violent, and the schemer falls into the pit which he digs for another." He seized the dog-whip swiftly from the dead man's lap, threw the noose round the reptile's neck, drew it from its horrid perch, and, carrying it at arm's length, threw it into the iron safe, which he closed upon it. Such are the true facts of the death of Dr. Grimesby Roylott of Stoke Moran. As we drove back together in the early dawn, Holmes turned to me. "I had come to an entirely erroneous conclusion, my dear Watson, which shows how dangerous it always is to reason from insufficient data. The presence of the gypsies and the use of the word band, which was used to explain the appearance which the poor girl had glimpsed of the snake, were sufficient to put me upon an entirely wrong scent." He paused. "The idea of using a form of poison which could not possibly be discovered by any chemical test was a particularly cunning one. He kept the snake in the safe, fed it on milk, trained it with the whistle to return to him. The first light of dawn was breaking over the Surrey hills. And so, the speckled band was no band at all. Helen Stoner lived a long and peaceful life after that night, and Sherlock Holmes returned to Baker Street to wait for the next strange knock upon his door. If this story helped you drift towards sleep, consider subscribing to Foggy London Nights and ringing the bell for a new Sherlock Holmes mystery each week. Next time, A pawnbroker walks into Baker Street with a question that has baffled even the great detective. Why would a mysterious league pay handsomely for red-headed men alone? Until then, sleep well, dear listener. The fog will be waiting.